Imagine a quiet night, the kind where time seems to stand still. The world sleeps, wrapped in silence, and only the stars shimmer faintly in the dark, endless sky. Before you burns a gentle fire. Its golden flame flickers and bends, casting moving shadows across the earth. The air is cool, yet the warmth of the fire embraces you like an old friend. Each spark that rises and fades feels like a heartbeat, soft, rhythmic, eternal. The logs crackle softly, the sound hypnotic, almost ancient, as if echoing from somewhere deep within your own mind. You settle into this stillness, letting the noise of the day dissolve, letting thought and breath slow down until only awareness remains out here. By the fire begins our journey, not across lands or oceans, but through the vast landscape of the human soul. It is here that we meet Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and mystic, the explorer of dreams and shadows. The man who peered into the hidden chambers of the psyche and returned with maps of the unconscious. He was not merely a scientist, he was a seeker, a listener of symbols, a translator of the language that the soul whispers in the silence of the night. From his childhood in a small Swiss village, where he would ponder eternity and the mystery of life, to his years as a physician in Zurich, Jung's path was illuminated by a single burning question: what moves within the depths of the human mind? We will walk with him through the corridors of thought, where psychology meets mythology, where science touches the realm of dreams. We will see how his early fascination with the unseen led him to Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, and how their friendship, once a brilliant flame, ended in philosophical rupture, igniting the birth of analytical psychology. This is not merely a story of theories and discoveries. It is the story of a soul seeking meaning in a disenchanted world. A man who believed that understanding oneself is the highest form of knowledge. As the fire crackles and the night deepens, imagine the glow of its light reflected in Jung's studied books, scattered journals filled with sketches of dreams, visions, and symbols. His mind bridging the rational and the mystical. He listened to the voices of the unconscious as one listens to myths told by an ancient storyteller. In those depths, he discovered the archetypes, the timeless patterns of human experience. The hero, the mother, the sage, the shadow figures that live within all of us, shaping the stories we live without ever seeing them. And behind them all, he sensed something greater, a collective unconscious, a shared field of memory that binds every soul to the ancient story of humankind. Tonight, this story is not just about Jung, it is about us. About you, about me, about everyone who has ever searched for meaning in their dreams or heard a quiet voice within urging them toward transformation. As the flames rise and fall, let them be symbols of illumination, of the light that flickers even in the deepest night of the soul. So, sit back. Let the warmth of the fire and the rhythm of the story carry you beyond the edges of thought, into the places where the mind meets the mystery. For this is not a lecture. This is a journey, a meditation on the depths of the human spirit, a gentle invitation to explore the vast universe within. The childhood of Carl Jung, the boy who dreamed of the invisible. Carl Gustav Jung was born on July 26, 1875, in a small Swiss village nestled among mountains and rivers. His father, Johann Paul Achilles Jung, was a pastor, gentle, kind, but burdened by doubts he rarely spoke aloud. His mother, Emily, was strong, intuitive, and mysterious, at times tender and loving, and at times distant, lost somewhere deep in her own unseen world. Between them, young Carl grew up in a home where faith and silence lived side by side. He was a solitary child, not lonely, but inwardly rich. He spent hours alone, listening to the murmur of the wind and the rustle of the trees. Solitude was not emptiness for him. It was a doorway. Even as a boy, he felt that the world around him was more than what could be seen, that behind every sound, every shadow, every glimmer of light, something sacred was hiding. He read voraciously, diving into myths and legends that spoke to him more deeply than the sermons he heard in church. In one story, gods battled in the heavens. In another, heroes wandered through dark forests seeking meaning. He did not yet know it, but these stories were early echoes of what he would one day call archetypes, the eternal patterns that live within every human mind. Sometimes, when he wandered alone through the fields or stood before the vastness of the Alps, he felt the presence of something ancient, vast, and wise. The mountains seemed alive, the rivers spoke in whispers, and the wind carried voices from beyond time. He would stand motionless, staring into the distance, thinking, the world is so immense, and I am so small. Yet somewhere within it all, there must be a hidden meaning, and one day, I will find it. Jung's relationship with his parents shaped the foundation of his inner world. His father's quiet resignation stirred in him both compassion and rebellion. He could sense the struggle between belief and doubt. His mother's unpredictability fascinated and frightened him. Her mysterious moods taught him that light and darkness could dwell within one's soul. These early experiences became the first stones in the vast cathedral of his later psychology. He began to notice what others ignored, that dreams had a life of their own, that people's eyes carried secrets they didn't understand themselves, and that faith, though spoken of in words, often lived in symbols and silence. The invisible world was calling him long before he knew what to call it. And so, from the solitude of a small Swiss village, a quiet boy began his lifelong journey, the journey not outward, but inward toward the unseen realms of the mind, where myth and meaning meet. The university years, awakening the scientist of the soul. When Carl Jung grew older, his fascination with the mysteries of human nature led him to a path that seemed both ordinary and destined. He chose to study medicine at the University of Basel. For many, it was a practical choice, a stable profession. But for Jung, it was something else entirely. Beneath the surface of anatomy and biology, he sensed that the true landscape worth exploring was the one no scalpel could touch, the realm of the mind. The unseen forces shaping human thought and emotion. From the very first lectures, Jung felt a quiet restlessness. He admired the precision of science, yet found himself drawn to its edges, to the questions that textbooks did not answer. He realized that healing the body was noble, but healing the soul was divine. His attention gravitated towards psychiatry, a field considered by many at the time to be obscure, even dubious. It was, in those days, a corner of medicine filled with uncertainty, where madness was feared more than understood. But for Jung, it was a frontier, a dark ocean waiting to be explored. If the human mind was a vast sea, he thought, then psychiatry would be his vessel to cross it. After completing his studies, Jung joined one of the most advanced psychiatric institutions in Europe, the Bergholzli Clinic in Zurich. It was not merely a hospital. It was a crucible of innovation and observation, where some of the most daring minds in psychology gathered to study the enigma of human behavior. There, under the mentorship of Eugen Bleuler, the brilliant psychiatrist who coined the term schizophrenia, Jung began the real education of his life. At Bergholzli, every day was an encounter with the unknown. Jung met men and women who lived in worlds shaped by fear, fantasy, and fragments of forgotten dreams. He listened to them with a compassion and curiosity few doctors possessed. He took notes, observed their gestures, their pauses, their silences, and slowly began to see that every symptom was not just a medical condition, but a story. He sensed that behind every word spoken by his patients lay something deeper, a hidden truth, a submerged memory, an ancient pattern. One day, during a conversation with a patient, Jung felt a sudden realization. Beneath the surface of conscious thought, something vast and living was moving. It was as though the human mind had layers, some accessible, others buried so deep that only dreams or slips of the tongue could reveal them. This insight would stay with him forever and become the seed of what he would later call the unconscious. Eager to understand these inner mechanisms, Jung began experimenting with what he called the word association test. In this method, He would read a word aloud and ask the patient to respond with the first word that came to mind. Simple, it seemed, but Jung noticed that when a word struck a hidden nerve, the response slowed, the voice changed, the emotion trembled. These tiny delays were windows into hidden conflicts, proof that invisible forces within the psyche could shape even the smallest action. Each day at the clinic deepened Jung's conviction that the human mind was not chaos, but an intricate cosmos waiting to be mapped. He saw that to truly heal a person, one must go beyond the surface of symptoms and touch the deeper essence of the soul meets fears, symbols, and dreams. Berkeley became more than his workplace. It became the birthplace of his philosophy. From those long nights in the clinic, among patients who spoke in riddles of pain and revelation, the young doctor from Switzerland began to transform. The scientist of the body was becoming the explorer of the spirit. The physician was becoming the philosopher. The man was becoming Carl Gustav Jung, the thinker who would one day chart the depths of the human psyche. The meeting with Freud. To minds, one shadow of the year was 1907. Carl Jung was 32, already known as a brilliant psychiatrist and a rising star in the world of psychological research. His work at the Berkeley Clinic had brought him both recognition and respect. Through his experiments with association tests and his careful observation of patients, Jung was beginning to glimpse a hidden structure behind the chaos of the human mind, something vast, mysterious, and deeply ordered. At the same time, across Europe, another name was echoing through the corridors of science as Sigmund Freud. His revolutionary theory of psychoanalysis had begun to reshape the way people thought about the mind. Freud claimed that beneath our rational selves lies a powerful, invisible force, the unconscious, filled with desires, fears, and memories that shape every thought and act. For Jung, this idea struck a chord. It was as if someone had given voice to the very intuition that had been forming in his own soul for years. Jung devoured Freud's writings, especially the interpretation of dreams. He read it not just as a scientific text, but as a revelation, a bridge between the waking and the hidden worlds of the psyche. In Freud, Jung felt he had found not merely a colleague, but a kindred spirit, another explorer of the invisible. And so, with both admiration and courage, he wrote to Freud. Freud, already in his 50s and well established as a pioneer, was intrigued by this young Swiss doctor whose mind seemed alive with possibility. Their letters soon became a stream of deep philosophical exchange, reflections on dreams, myth, neurosis, and the architecture of the human soul. When they finally met in Vienna, what was meant to be a formal conversation turned into a 13-hour dialogue, an uninterrupted torrent of ideas, laughter, and discovery. It was as though two explorers, long wandering alone through different continents of the mind, had at last met at the same shore. Freud saw in Jung the ideal heir to his intellectual legacy of the crown prince of psychoanalysis. For Jung, it was a moment of recognition, even destiny, to be seen, understood, and accepted by the man who had opened the door to the unconscious. That day marked the beginning of one of the most fascinating friendships and eventual rivalries in the history of psychology. For a time, they were united by a shared passion to understand the secret machinery of the human soul. Yet beneath the brilliance of their connection, the seeds of divergence were already quietly taking root to great minds drawn together by vision, destined to part by truth. Jung and Freud had collaboration, and the great divide in the early years of the 20th century. Carl Jung stood side by side with Sigmund Freud at the dawn of a new science, the exploration of the human soul. Jung became one of Freud's closest collaborators, helping him expand the reach of psychoanalysis far beyond Vienna, across German-speaking Europe, and eventually to America. Together, they organized the first conferences devoted to the mysteries of the unconscious, to dreams, childhood memories, and the tangled roots of neurosis. Their partnership was more than professional. It was personal. even spiritual. Despite the difference in age and temperament, they shared a sense of discovery, as though they were mapping a new continent of the mind. Freud admired Jung's brilliance and charisma, seeing in him the man who could carry psychoanalysis into the future. To Jung, Freud was a mentor and an intellectual father of a mind of immense depth, whose courage to look into the darkness of the human psyche had opened doors few dared to approach. But beneath the surface of their collaboration, quiet cracks began to form. Jung could not ignore a growing discomfort. Freud's theory, though revolutionary, seemed to him too narrow, too bound to one theme: sexuality. For Freud, the sexual drive was the central force behind all human behavior, the root of dreams, desires, and suffering. But Jung saw the human soul as a far wider landscape, a field where myth, spirituality, and mystery intertwined. To him, reducing the psyche to biological impulses felt like closing the window on an infinite sky. Still, in those early years, their friendship flourished. They exchanged letters filled with admiration and intensity, arguing late into the night, questioning the boundaries of science and faith. Freud once called Jung the crown prince of psychoanalysis, believing he would one day inherit his legacy. Yet even as Jung accepted this title, part of him knew that his path would eventually lead beyond his teacher's map. Over time, their discussions grew heavier, their disagreements sharper. Jung's ideas about symbolism, myth, and the collective nature of the unconscious began to disturb Freud, who feared that the young Swiss doctor was drifting into mysticism and leaving science behind. Freud, ever the rationalist, warned him, "Our doctrine must remain consistent. Any deviation will destroy it." For Jung, this was a breaking point. He could not serve a doctrine of only truth. His calling was not to guard boundaries but to cross them. He believed that within the human psyche lay not only personal memories, but also ancient patterns, universal forces that linked all of humanity, what he would soon call the collective unconscious. Their friendship, once vibrant, began to fade into distance and silence. When Jung started publishing his own works outlining ideas that diverged radically from Freud's, Freud felt betrayed. In 1913, their collaboration ended. Jung resigned from the International Psychoanalytic Association and walked away from the movement he had helped to shape. It was a painful rupture for both men. Jung later admitted that it was one of the most difficult times in his life, the collapse of a friendship that had once meant the world to him. But from that loss emerged freedom. Freed from the shadow of Freud, Jung could finally follow his own vision, to explore the psyche as a living myth, to trace the symbols that connect the individual with the eternal. That separation marked not an end, but a beginning, the birth of analytical psychology, a discipline that sought not merely to treat the mind, but to understand the soul. The crown prince had stepped away from the throne and in doing so, became a king in his own right. Analytical psychology, the collective unconscious, and the world of archetypes. When Carl Gustav Jung finally broke away from Freud, he found himself standing at a crossroads, wounded by loss, yet liberated by possibility. The separation had cost him a friend, a mentor, and a sense of belonging, but in return, it had given him what he valued most: freedom. Now, the vast landscape of the human soul lay before him, uncharted and waiting to be explored. Jung had always been more than a doctor. He was an explorer of meaning, seeker of the invisible patterns beneath the surface of life. With the chains of dogma removed, his mind soared. He began to develop his own approach to understanding the human psyche, a system that would later be known as analytical psychology. And like Freud, who focused on sexuality and individual experience as the foundation of the unconscious, Jung believed that the human mind reached far beyond personal memory. He proposed that within each of us exists something greater and older, a deep layer he called the collective unconscious. This was not shaped by individual experience but shared by all of humanity, across time and culture. In this vast inner realm, Jung believed, dwell the archetypes, universal patterns, symbols, and mythic images that appear in every civilization's stories, dreams, and religions. Heroes and dragons, wise elders and nurturing mothers. Light and shadow, these timeless figures live within us, whispering through our dreams and shaping our perceptions. To prove this, Jung studied myths, folklore, and dreams from across the world. He noticed striking similarities. People who had never met, separated by oceans and centuries, described the same figures, the same journeys, the same fears and revelations. It was as if humanity shared a hidden memory of a collective story written deep in the soul. Jung began to refine his methods, guiding his patients not only through their memories but also through their inner symbols. He believed that dreams were a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, the sacred dialogue between the known and the unknown parts of the self. Each dream, he taught, was a message coded in metaphor, pointing toward balance, healing, and integration. To explain these ideas, Jung drew not only on psychology but also on mythology, religion, art, and philosophy. He believed that to understand the mind, one must also understand culture, for the soul speaks in symbols, and symbols live in the stories humanity tells. His approach was radical for its time, blending science with spirituality, reason with imagination. But analytical psychology was not merely a theory, it was a map for self-discovery. Jung taught that within each person lives a constant striving for wholeness, a process he called individuation. To individuate is to bring the hidden into light, to recognize both the noble and the dark within us, and to unite them into a single, authentic self. He often spoke of the shadow of the parts of our psyche we deny or fear, and insisted that true growth begins only when we face it. One does not become enlightened, Jung wrote, by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Through his lectures, books, and countless sessions with patients, Jung became not only a healer but a philosopher of the soul. His ideas resonated far beyond the walls of clinics. Artists, writers, and mystics found in his words a mirror for their own creative journeys. He opened a door into the symbolic world, showing humanity that to know oneself is to know the collective dreams of mankind. And so began the age of analytical psychology, a movement that forever changed how we understand the human mind. Jung revealed that within each of us lie not only our wounds, but also immense possibilities, the capacity to grow, to create, and to awaken. His vision continues to inspire to this day, reminding us that the journey into the unconscious is, ultimately, the journey home. Journeys in Search of Archetypes. After the painful separation from Freud and the birth of his own school of thought, Carl Gustav Jung felt an inner pull, the call to go beyond the limits of books, laboratories, and European thought itself. His theories about the collective unconscious had taken form, but he sensed they were incomplete. To truly understand the soul, he believed, one must go where the human spirit still spoke in symbols, to places untouched by modernity, where myth was not yet forgotten but lived. In the 1920s, Jung began a series of expeditions that would profoundly shape his vision of humanity. His first great journey took him to North Africa, and later to the plains and mountains of East Africa. There, among landscapes untouched by the Western world, Jung sought the echoes of something ancient. He observed the rituals, myths, and daily lives of local tribes, and in their dances, stories, and sacred ceremonies, he recognized the same universal images that appeared in the dreams of his patients back in Europe. The hero, the spirit animal, the shadow, the great mother, these were not inventions of civilization but eternal forms, living within the soul of every human being. Jung wrote that these societies, often dismissed by the modern world as primitive, were in fact closer to the raw essence of the collective unconscious. They still lived in harmony with the symbolic world, the same world from which modern men had become estranged. One night, as Jung sat by a fire under the vast African sky, watching the constellations shimmer above the horizon, he felt a sudden sense of unity, as if the boundary between himself and that ancient world dissolved. In that moment, He later wrote, "I felt that I had returned to something long forgotten, yet deeply familiar to the roots of the human soul itself, but Africa was only the beginning." Drawn by his thirst for spiritual understanding, Jung traveled onward to India, a land steeped in philosophy, meditation, and mysticism. There he studied Hindu scriptures, visited ashrams, and spoke with wise men about the nature of consciousness. It was in India that Jung first encountered the sacred image of the model of a circular pattern used for meditation and inner harmony. The model struck him profoundly. To him, it was not just an artistic symbol but a living expression of the psyche's desire for wholeness, a universal image of order rising from chaos. He began to draw mandalas himself and to encourage his patients to do the same, seeing in their circular symmetry a map of the soul's journey toward balance and integration. Jung was equally captivated by the Eastern vision of the self's unity with the cosmos. Indian philosophy taught that the divine and the human were not separate but reflections of one another, a belief that confirmed Jung's intuition that the psyche is not confined by personal experience but part of something vast and timeless. His explorations continued to South America, where he studied the spiritual practices of indigenous peoples, and later to North America, where he met Native American tribes. In their rituals, chants, and shamanic visions, he again found the same symbolic language, the same figures that haunted the dreams of his European patients. Whether in a dessert ceremony or a Swiss clinic, the images were the same. It was as though humanity shared one vast, invisible mythology, a story written into the very fabric of the mind. These journeys were more than scientific expeditions. They were pilgrimages into the living heart of myth. Jung realized that myths and symbols are the universal language of the soul, the language that speaks of our fears, our longings, and our eternal search for meaning. A man may lose touch with his roots, Jung wrote, but his soul remembers the ancient paths. What Jung discovered in Africa, India, and the Americas forever transformed his understanding of psychology. The collective unconscious was no longer just a theory, it was a living reality, pulsing through every culture and every dream. His travels revealed that to understand the mind is to understand the stories humanity tells, for through those stories, we remember who we are. And in the end, Jung's journeys were not only across continents but deep within himself, into the inner wilderness where the human soul meets the eternal. Later works and the mystery of synchronicity. By the final decades of his life, Carl Gustav Jung had become one of the most luminous and controversial figures in modern psychology. His ideas inspired some and settled others, and often stood decades ahead of their time. Though Jung had long withdrawn from the rigid institutions of academic medicine and from Freud's intellectual circle, his later works shone with extraordinary depth, uniting science, philosophy, and spirituality into a single, living vision of the human soul. In these years, Jung delved deeper into the symbolism that had always fascinated him, crafting books that blended psychology with theology, alchemy, and art. In his provocative work Answer to Job, he dared to reinterpret one of the most profound biblical stories, exploring the paradoxical relationship between humanity and the divine, between good and evil, suffering and transcendence. The book sparked controversy among theologians, but for Jung, it was not heresy. It was an attempt to reveal how mythic images reflect the human struggle to make sense of both pain and divinity. His fascination with religion and symbolism continued in psychology and alchemy and Mysterium Coniunctionis, monumental texts where he compared the ancient language of alchemy to the processes of psychological transformation. To Jung, the alchemist's search for gold was not about matter but spirit, a metaphor for the soul's inner evolution, where each stage of the alchemical process mirrored the journey toward wholeness. The fire of the furnace became the fire of consciousness, the union of opposites, the marriage of the psyche's fragmented parts. But among all his later ideas, Perhaps the most mysterious and poetic was synchronicity, the notion that events can be meaningfully connected without a clear cause and effect relationship. Jung noticed moments when the outer world seemed to mirror the inner one, when a dream, a symbol, or a thought found its reflection in real life, as if the universe itself were responding. A person thinks of an old friend, and that friend suddenly appears. A symbol from a dream reveals itself in waking reality. To Jung, these were not coincidences, but signs of a deeper pattern, evidence of an invisible order where psyche and matter are intertwined. Collaborating with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, one of the pioneers of quantum theory, Jung sought to bridge psychology and physics to suggest that the universe operates not only through cause and effect, but also through meaning. Together, they explored the strange unity between mind and matter, intuition and science. Jung called synchronicity a causal connecting principle, a concept that continues to inspire both scientists and mystics to this day. By the 1950s, despite criticism from conservative scholars, Jung's reputation had grown worldwide. His books were translated into dozens of languages. His lectures drew audiences across continents, and he met with great thinkers of his age, among them Albert Schweitzer and mythologist Joseph Campbell, who would later expand Jung's ideas into his own theory of the hero's journey. Jung's influence began to transcend psychology. Artists, writers, and filmmakers drew upon his archetypes and his vision of the unconscious as a creative force. His ideas echoed in the works of Hermann Hesse, Jorge Luis Borges, Ingmar Bergman, and countless others who sought to depict the inner landscapes of the human mind. Yet Jung himself remained humble, almost detached from fame. "I am not what happened to me," he once said. "I am what I choose to become." In his final years, he withdrew to his home in Kusnacht, on the serene shores of Lake Zurich, where he continued to write, reflect, and receive a few devoted students. His writings from this period grew increasingly philosophical, focusing on the mysteries of life, death, and the transformation of the soul. In 1961, shortly before his passing, Jung completed his autobiographical work Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In it, he spoke openly of his fears, his visions, and the archetypal images that visited him in dreams. The book became not only a personal memoir but a spiritual testament, a window into the inner world of a man who had spent his entire life exploring the depths of the human psyche. Carl Gustav Jung passed away in 1961, leaving behind an immense legacy, a library of ideas that continues to shape modern thought. Concepts like archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation have entered our cultural language, influencing psychology, art, and even physics. Jung showed the world that a human being is not merely a collection of habits and memories, but a living bridge between the personal and the cosmic, between the seen and the unseen. His life reminds us that the path of self-knowledge is an endless journey, one that leads not away from the world, but deeper into it, toward the mysterious unity that binds all things together. The collective unconscious and the archetypes. As Jung's journey deeper into the human psyche continued, he reached what would become one of the most profound discoveries in the history of psychology, the concept of the collective unconscious. He had long believed that beneath our personal memories and experiences, there lies something far greater, something shared, a deep, timeless reservoir of human knowledge, symbols, and instincts. Imagine, Jung said, that within each of us there is not only the story of our individual life, but also the memory of all humanity. We are born not as blank slates, but as inheritors of a vast, ancient consciousness, the echoes of countless generations that came before us. This inner layer, invisible yet powerful, shapes how we perceive, dream, love, and fear. He called this realm the collective unconscious, a universal foundation of the psyche that transcends culture, language, and time. Within it dwell the archetypes, the primordial images, the universal symbols that have guided humanity since the dawn of consciousness. These archetypes are not merely artistic ideas or cultural motifs. They are living structures within the human soul, shaping our thoughts and emotions long before we are aware of them. Jung noticed that myths, religions, and dreams from vastly different cultures shared the same symbolic themes: the hero who faces darkness, the wise old man who offers guidance, the nurturing mother, the shadow that embodies fear and desire. These patterns, he realized, were not coincidences, they were reflections of something deep and universal, a shared psychic inheritance. Each archetype acts like a blueprint, influencing how we respond to life's great questions: love, loss, power, purpose, death. When we face major transformations or crises, these ancient patterns awaken within us, guiding our imagination towards stories of courage, sacrifice, and renewal. We may think we are alone in our struggles, but the symbols that arise in our dreams remind us that humanity has walked this path before and survived. For Jung, archetypes were more than abstract ideas. They were forces of the psyche, expressing themselves through dreams, myths, art, and even the events of our lives. He saw them as part of a vast inner system, an ancient memory embedded in the human spirit, shaping both our fears and our highest aspiration. To Jung, this understanding was not just theoretical. It was a revelation of unity. It explained why people from every corner of the world, regardless of culture or faith, are drawn to the same timeless stories, the same symbols of rebirth and transformation. The archetypes are humanity's shared language, the soul's handwriting etched into every human being. Among these archetypes, Jung often spoke of the hero, the shadow, the mother, and the wise old man, but also of subtler forces, the Anima and Animus, the inner feminine and masculine that dwell within every person. These symbols, he believed, are pathways toward wholeness, helping us to balance our inner opposites and move closer to self-realization. Archetypes do not belong to any one era or people. They exist outside of time and space, carried across generations like invisible roots connecting all human lives. They appear when the psyche seeks meaning in moments of creation, despair, or revelation, offering guidance through images and emotions more ancient than words. For Jung, to understand the archetypes was to glimpse the architecture of the soul itself. They reveal that the human mind is not an isolated island, but part of a great collective sea of memory and myth. Every dream, every story, every symbol is a thread in this vast tapestry, reminding us that our individual lives are interwoven with something eternal, the collective unconscious. Jung taught, is not a concept to be mastered, but a mystery to be experienced, the sacred mirror through which we can finally see that within each of us lives the history of all humankind. The persona, the mask we wear before the world. Let us now turn to one of Jung's most fascinating and relatable archetypes, the persona, or the mask. This is the face we present to the world, the role we play in society, and the image we carefully construct to meet expectations. The persona is not inherently false, it is a necessary bridge between our inner world and the outer one. Yet, when we begin to identify with it too deeply, it can become a prison made of smiles and obligations. Imagine a woman who, in public, appears to be the perfect mother, calm, radiant, endlessly patient. Her children are polite, her home immaculate, and she always has kind words for others. But when the door closes and the world no longer watches, she exhales. Beneath that polished surface may live exhaustion, doubt, or quiet grief. The mask has protected her, but it has also hidden her true emotions, even from herself. Or picture a company director, confident, decisive, admired for strength and control. Colleagues see a leader unshaken by pressure. Yet behind that facade might be someone haunted by anxiety, afraid of losing the respect that keeps his world intact. The armor of authority conceals the human vulnerability beneath. Literature and myth are filled with such examples. Think of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's tragic hero, eternally beautiful on the outside, while his hidden portrait bears the scars of his true self. His perfect appearance is his persona, his decaying portrait, the shadow he refuses to face. Or consider Mr. Rochester from Jane Eyre, harsh, cynical, seemingly in feeling, but his stern exterior conceals pain, regret, and a longing to be understood. His mask is not cruelty, it is protection. Even ancient myths reveal the same truth. Hercules, the epitome of strength and heroism, is remembered as a flawless champion, yet behind the legend lies a man tormented by rage, guilt, and unbearable trials. His divine mask hides his human suffering. Or Odin, the wandering god of the Norse myths, who often disguises himself to walk among mortals' changing forms, hiding his true nature. The gods themselves wear masks, it seems, for even wisdom sometimes cloaks itself in mystery. In everyday life, we do the same. The persona helps us navigate the expectations of family, work, and society. It allows us to function. But when the mask becomes too rigid, when we live only through the image others expect, something vital begins to fade. The person who always pretends to be cheerful so as not to burden others slowly forgets what genuine sadness feels like. The professional who plays the role of the unshakable leader may lose touch with the soft, spontaneous part of himself that once felt joy without purpose. Jung warned that the danger of the persona is not in wearing it, but in believing it is who we are. When the mask fuses with the face, the soul begins to suffocate behind social perfection. The goal, then, is not to destroy the persona, but to make it transparent, to let authenticity breathe through it. Every role we play, parent, friend, teacher, artist, manager, has its purpose. But behind them must always live something real, something unmasked. To know your persona is to begin the journey inward, to recognize that beneath every role there is a soul longing to be seen, not as it appears, but as it truly is. The shadow, the other face of the self. If the mask is the part of us that smiles before the world, the persona we carefully craft to be accepted and understood, then the shadow is its hidden twin, living quietly behind that light. It is everything we prefer not to see, the anger we suppress, the envy we deny, the desires we call unworthy. The shadow is not a monster lurking in the dark corners of our soul. It is the part of us that has been exiled, forgotten, or misunderstood. Yet, like a silenced voice, it never stops speaking. Imagine a person who always tries to be kind, agreeable, and peaceful. Everyone knows them as patient and gentle, incapable of conflict. But beneath this calm exterior, resentment grows. Small moments of frustration, anger, and fatigue that have been swallowed for years. Those emotions don't vanish, they wait. One day they erupt unexpectedly, through sarcasm, passive aggression, or sudden outbursts that leave the person confused and ashamed. What has happened is simple. The shadow has spoken. In literature and myth, the shadow takes countless forms. Consider Achilles, a flawless warrior, a symbol of courage and glory. Yet behind his brilliance lies fear, the fear of failure, the fear of mortality, the fear of being forgotten. It is his shadow that makes him human. Or think of the villain, seemingly evil, heartless, but redeemable. Beneath the darkness often hides something achingly familiar, a wound, a longing to be seen, a desperate need for love. In Norse mythology, Loki embodies the archetype of the shadow, clever, chaotic, and dangerous, yet essential. His tricks reveal the hidden weaknesses of the gods, forcing them to confront their arrogance and fragility. Through Loki, disorder exposes truth. The shadow is never purely destructive. It is the mirror that shows what the light refuses to see. In real life, the shadow can appear in the smallest moments, a surge of irritation towards someone who mirrors your own flaws, an unexplained jealousy, a fear of being exposed. When we deny these emotions, they don't disappear, they move underground, shaping our behavior from the dark. But when we dare to face them, they transform. Jung taught that the shadow is not the enemy of the self, it is the doorway to wholeness. To confront it is not to destroy it, but to understand it. Anger, for example, can reveal what truly matters to us. Fear can point to the edges of our growth. Even envy can show us what our soul secretly longs to create. Facing the shadow requires honesty, not the kind that confesses to others, but the quiet, internal truth we speak to ourselves. When we stop running from our own darkness, we begin to see that it has been carrying light all along. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim what was lost, to welcome back the parts of ourselves that have been waiting in silence. It is the beginning of becoming whole, of standing in both light and dark without fear. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And so, the shadow is not our downfall, it is our teacher, the one who shows us what we still need to love, forgive, and understand within ourselves. Anima and Animus, an inner union. If the shadow forces us to look into the parts of ourselves we'd rather hide, then the next archetype leads us into even deeper waters of the soul. The Anima and the Animus are not about conflict or repression. They are about balance, about the subconscious longing for wholeness that lives within every human being. These archetypes represent our inner counterparts, the unseen reflection of the opposite gender within us. In Jung's view, every man carries within him an anima, the feminine aspect of his psyche, while every woman holds an animus, the masculine counterpart within her. But this isn't about gender or imitation. It's about energy, balance, and the invisible qualities that make us whole. For a man, the anima embodies sensitivity, intuition, and emotional depth, the capacity to feel, to empathize, to listen to the quiet movements of the heart. It's that inner voice that invites tenderness and imagination in a world that often demands strength and control. For a woman, the animus represents strength, reason, and determination, the courage to act, to speak truth, to stand tall when life calls for leadership. It's that firm inner presence that whispers, "You can." To understand these forces, imagine everyday people around you. A man who seems stoic and unshakable yet writes poetry in secret, or weeps quietly when moved by beauty, he is listening to his anima, the inner woman who teaches him the language of feeling. A woman who appears gentle and reserved but, in moments of crisis, rises with clarity and authority as she is guided by her animus, the strength that dwells deep within her soul. Jung often explained that the anima and animus reveal themselves through relationships and projections. The people we fall in love with, the figures we admire or fear, are often reflections of these hidden forces within us. The man, through his encounters with women, begins to recognize and integrate his anima, learning compassion, emotion, and the mystery of feeling. The woman, through her encounters with men, discovers her animus, learning logic, self-trust, and independence. You can see these patterns everywhere in myths, stories, and even modern fiction. For instance, Hermione in Harry Potter is more than a friend to Harry. She mirrors his inner anima, the wisdom and thoughtfulness that guide his impulsive courage. Or take Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. To Elizabeth, he becomes the embodiment of her animus, the figure through whom she learns confidence and discernment. In the ancient myths, these archetypes appear again and again. The radiant Aphrodite, symbol of beauty and tenderness, is not merely a goddess of love, she represents man's longing for emotional harmony and union. Meanwhile, for women, figures like Odin from Norse legend, wise, commanding, and unyielding, can symbolize the awakening of the inner animus, intellect, foresight, and strength. The anima and animus are like two halves of a circle, each incomplete without the other. They are not meant to dominate or replace, but to unite. A man who acknowledges his anima becomes more emotionally mature, capable of deep empathy and creativity. A woman who embraces her animus becomes grounded and self-assured, able to act from wisdom rather than fear. Together, they lead the psyche toward inner harmony, the reconciliation of opposites. Jung saw this integration as an essential step on the path of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole. When we embrace both sides of our nature, the soft and the strong, the intuitive and the rational, we begin to live not as fragments, but as complete beings. Ultimately, the Anima and Animus remind us that love, both for others and for ourselves, is not found in seeking perfection outside but in uniting the opposites within. The man learns to listen to his heart, the woman learns to trust her voice, and both walk closer to the truth of who they really are, not divided, but whole. The archetype of the wise old man. If the archetypes of Anima and Animus guide us toward inner balance or reconciling the masculine and feminine within, then the wise old man turns our gaze outward, toward wisdom, knowledge, and truth. The sage is the inner voice that whispers when reason falters, the quiet mentor who helps us navigate confusion and see beyond illusion. This archetype represents the timeless human search for understanding. The wise man is not merely intelligent, he is perceptive, grounded in experience, and guided by a deep awareness that knowledge without compassion is empty. In myths and stories, he appears as the guide, prophet, the hermit, or the teacher, the one who shows the hero the path but never walks it for him. We meet this archetype often in our own lives. Sometimes it takes the form of a teacher whose words ignite a spark of insight, or an older friend who listens quietly and says just one sentence that changes everything. Sometimes it's a book, a voice from another time, that seems to speak directly to our soul. And sometimes, without realizing it, we ourselves become the wise one for someone else, sharing lessons drawn from our own struggles and failures. In literature and myth, this archetype is everywhere. Think of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, the mysterious guide who doesn't fight every battle but whose presence makes victory possible. He is not the hero, yet without him, the hero's journey would collapse. Gandalf represents the same energy that Jung saw in the human psyche, the inner guide that leads us through darkness toward understanding. In ancient myths, this archetype takes many forms. The Greek god Hermes, for example, was not only a messenger but also a bridge between worlds, guiding souls to the underworld, teaching mortals, and revealing hidden knowledge. In other traditions, the sage appears as the shaman, the prophet, or the elder, the keeper of the world's forgotten wisdom. For Jung, the wise old man symbolizes the self's voice of higher insight, the part of us that transcends ego and connects to the collective wisdom of humanity. It is the archetype that emerges in dreams when we are ready to listen, when chaos demands order, and when the soul seeks direction. But the sage does not offer easy answers. Like a true mentor, he asks questions that force us to confront our own truth. He does not carry us across the river, he simply points to the bridge. His wisdom is not about control, but understanding, not about power, but presence. In everyday life, we can recognize this archetype in moments of quiet realization, when we suddenly know what must be done. Not because someone told us, but because something deep within us has spoken. The wise old man is that voice, the timeless teacher who dwells inside each of us, waiting for us to ask the right question. And perhaps this is the ultimate lesson of the sage, that wisdom is not found in knowing more, but in seeing more clearly. The archetype reminds us that every experience of joy, loss, confusion, and silence can become a teacher if we are willing to listen. The hero archetype, the journey of courage and transformation. If the archetype of the wise old man teaches us where to look for truth, then the archetype of the hero shows us how to move toward it. The hero is the symbol of humanity's eternal struggle, the desire to overcome both outer trials and inner darkness. It is not only a story of victory, but of courage, transformation, and rebirth. The hero's journey begins not with strength, but with a call of a whisper that disturbs the comfort of ordinary life. Something within insists, there is more. To follow that call means to step into the unknown, to face one's fears and limitations, to risk everything for the sake of becoming more whole. In real life, the hero archetype appears not only in epic tales, but in everyday acts of perseverance. It is the person who, despite illness, keeps fighting for life and recovers. It is the one who leaves behind what is safe to start anew in a strange city, or the soul who dares to grow, to learn, to love again after loss. The hero is not always the one who triumphs, but always the one who refuses to surrender. From ancient myths to modern fiction, the hero's pattern repeats endlessly. Achilles and Hector in the Iliad, Harry Potter, Superman, Spider-Man all share the same inner blueprint. Each faces immense trials, and each must confront something greater than external danger, the shadow within. Achilles fights for honor but learns the cost of pride. Hector defends his home knowing his fate is sealed. And even the modern hero in a mask wrestles with the burden of responsibility and the longing for an ordinary life. In Greek legend, Perseus slays the Gorgon Medusa, yet his true battle is not with the monster outside but the fear within. By facing what terrifies him, he transcends it, emerging not just victorious, but transformed. That is the essence of the hero. Through ordeal, he becomes wiser, integrating his power with his humility. Jung saw this pattern not merely as storytelling, but as a reflection of our deepest psychological reality. Every person, he believed, must walk the hero's path at some point, descending into chaos, confronting the unknown, and emerging with greater consciousness. The dragons we fight are often our own fears, addictions, doubts, and memories. To defeat them is to reclaim a piece of the soul we have lost. Heroism, then, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. It is found in the quiet resolve of someone who chooses healing over despair, truth over comfort, integrity over approval. It is the courage to take the first step when the outcome is uncertain, the willingness to be changed by the journey itself. The hero archetype reminds us that every human life contains its own mythic dimension. The battles may look ordinary, but their meaning is timeless. Each act of courage is a small awakening of the soul. And though the road is never easy, it always leads to growth, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of who we truly are. Because in the end, the greatest victory is not over the world, but over oneself. The Mother Archetype. If the hero teaches us courage and the art of overcoming, then the Mother is the archetype that embodies care, protection, and the quiet strength of love. She represents emotional safety, nurturing, and the unseen force that allows us to grow, heal, and continue forward. The Mother is the original source of warmth, and the invisible foundation upon which our entire sense of belonging is built. In real life, the Mother Archetype appears in countless forms. She is the mother who stands by her child through every hardship, the grandmother whose gentle hands and soft words preserve the wisdom of generations, the caregiver or mentor who loves not out of duty but from the pure impulse of the heart. Sometimes she is not related to us by blood, yet her presence feels like home. In literature and art, the Mother often takes on sacred dimensions, her love portrayed as unconditional and eternal. Think of Mary in Dante's Divine Comedy, the symbol of compassion so vast that it forgives all and sustains all. Her love is an unbroken circle, always near even when unseen. In ancient mythologies, the Mother Archetype is inseparable from nature itself, from the earth that nourishes and renews life. In Greek mythology, Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, embodies this power. When her daughter Persephone is taken to the underworld, Demeter's grief halts the growth of all things. The world mourns with her until mother and child are reunited, and spring returns. Through Demeter, we glimpse the depth and ferocity of maternal love, a force that can move the very seasons. The Mother Archetype reminds us of the sacredness of care, compassion, and renewal. It is the energy that comforts us in despair and gives us the strength to rise again. Each of us can express this archetype every time we offer kindness, guidance, or a moment of understanding to another soul. Because motherhood, in Jung's view, is not limited to biology, it is a universal spiritual pattern. It is present in every act of love that protects, nourishes, and restores. Whether through a parent, a friend, mentor, or even a stranger's compassion, the Mother Archetype lives within us, all quietly reminding the world that gentleness, too, is a form of strength. The Child Archetype, the eternal beginning within us. If the Mother Archetype offers us care, safety, and the foundation upon which we grow, then the Child Archetype represents innocence, potential, and an unbroken thread of new beginnings. It is the symbol of purity unspoiled by cynicism, the spark of curiosity and wonder that lives within each of us. No matter how old we become, the child reminds us of our innate openness to life, our ability to learn, explore, and see the world through eyes unclouded by fear. It speaks of faith, a faith that the world, despite its darkness, is still full of meaning and discovery. In real life, this archetype awakens every time we take a first step into the unknown, starting a new job, moving to a new city, or learning something that changes the way we see ourselves. In those moments, we are children again, uncertain, vulnerable, yet alive with anticipation. Every mistake becomes a lesson, every small success a spark of wonder. The child within us thrives not on perfection, but on experience, on the courage to try, fail, and try again. In literature and myth, the child often appears as the hero at the beginning of their journey, fragile yet destined for growth. Think of Harry Potter, standing bewildered on platform 9 3/4, stepping into a world he cannot yet comprehend. He doesn't know the rules of magic or the dangers ahead, yet his innocence and willingness to learn become his greatest strengths. Through the trials he faces, the child within him transforms into the hero he was meant to be. In ancient myths, this archetype is linked to creation and renewal, the dawn of a new cycle. In Mesopotamian legends, the goddess Ishtar begins as a young seeker, striving to understand her purpose and the boundaries of the world. Her descent and return symbolize the journey from innocence to self-awareness, the timeless process of awakening to one's destiny. Jung saw in the child the promise of rebirth, the eternal potential for renewal that lives in every human soul. It is that quiet voice inside us that whispers, "You can begin again," even after loss, failure, or disillusionment. The child archetype invites us to rediscover joy, to look at life once more as a mystery waiting to unfold. This archetype lives within the part of us that still believes, that still marvels at sunlight through leaves, that still feels the unknown, that still dares to dream. It teaches us that growth does not mean abandoning innocence but transforming it into wisdom. Every time we choose curiosity over fear, learning over stagnation, openness over control, we awaken the child within, and in doing so, we reconnect with the purest part of ourselves, the one that trusts in life's endless capacity for renewal and still believes, against all odds, that there are wonders yet to come. The Trickster Archetype, the chaos that brings change. If the child archetype represents innocence and the openness to see the world as if for the first time, then the trickster is its mirror, of a figure that overturns order, breaks rules, and awakens transformation through chaos. The trickster laughs where others fear to speak, questions what others accept, and dances between light and shadow, reminding us that even disorder can be creative. This archetype exists in every culture and every age, under countless masks. It is the force that challenges stagnation, the spark that destroys so that new life may emerge. The trickster mocks authority, exposes hypocrisy, and reveals how fragile human order truly is. And yet, without this playful disruptor, there would be no movement, no innovation, no growth. In the modern world, the trickster might appear as the entrepreneur who breaks traditional rules and reshapes industries, or as the artist who provokes society to look at itself in the mirror of their creation. It could be the activist who tears down unjust systems, or the visionary thinker who refuses to follow the safe and expected path. Wherever there is rebellion that leads to awakening, the trickster's spirit lives. In mythology, this archetype takes many faces. Loki in Norse legends, a cunning, chaotic, destructive, whose mischiefs often bring both ruin and renewal. He disrupts divine order, but in doing so, forces the gods to evolve. Similarly, in Native American myths, the trickster often appears as Coyote, the humorous deceiver who bends the laws of nature, causing confusion and laughter in equal measure. Yet through his antics, he teaches wisdom, reminding humans that life is not a rigid structure, but a flowing, playful dance of creation and destruction. The trickster reminds us that chaos is not the enemy of life, it is part of its heartbeat. Without chaos, there can be no rebirth. Without the fool, there can be no wisdom. In our own lives, this archetype awakens when we dare to break free from expectations, when we question traditions, when we step into the unknown with curiosity instead of fear. It is the voice that says, "What if we do it differently?" Sometimes it manifests as a mistake that leads to revelation, a failure that becomes a turning point, or an accident that exposes truth. The trickster's chaos is not random, it is purposeful, serving as the necessary disturbance that shakes the stagnant waters of the soul. Every person carries a spark of this energy. Whenever we laugh at the absurdity of life, whenever we challenge what seems unchangeable, or create something that others call impossible, we are channeling the trickster within. He is both the destroyer and the liberator, the shadow that dances with light, the teacher who teaches through paradox. By embracing the trickster, we learn that wisdom does not always come from silence and serenity. Sometimes it arrives with laughter, confusion, and disruption. And in those moments, when order crumbles and uncertainty reigns, we begin to see the deeper truth, that chaos itself can be sacred, and that from the ashes of the old, something astonishingly new can be born. Working with archetypes, the path of individuation. After exploring the nature of archetypes and the collective unconscious, Jung turned to what he believed was their greatest purpose, the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. Archetypes, he taught, are not just symbols that live within the mind. They are mirrors that reflect the hidden sides of who we are. Through them, we can recognize the forgotten, the rejected, and the unacknowledged parts of ourselves, and by doing so, move toward integration and self-realization. Individuation, in Jung's view, is the process by which a person becomes truly themselves. It is the path of uniting all fragments of the psyche, the light and the shadow, the masculine and the feminine, the conscious and the unconscious into a single, balanced whole. The key word here is wholeness. For Jung, life itself was a continual unfolding of the self, a movement toward harmony between all the forces that live within us. When a person begins the journey of individuation, they inevitably encounter the shadow of those hidden aspects we deny, repress, or overlook. The shadow holds what we prefer not to see: envy, anger, fear, vulnerability, guilt, or forgotten desires. Yet, Jung insisted that it is not the shadow that destroys us, but our refusal to face it. Once we acknowledge and accept our shadow, it ceases to control us from the depths of the unconscious and instead becomes a source of strength and authenticity. Another essential step in this inner work is the recognition and integration of the Anima and Animus, the inner feminine within men and the inner masculine within women. Jung believed that every human being carries both principles, and balance between them brings emotional and spiritual completeness. To deny one side is to live only half a life. To embrace both is to awaken the full spectrum of our humanity. But individuation is not a quick or easy process. It is a slow transformation, often marked by inner conflict and loss. At times, the old self must crumble for the new to emerge. Jung compared it to the alchemical process, where base metals are purified by fire to become gold. Likewise, the human soul must pass through periods of disintegration before achieving integration. Pain, confusion, and doubt are not signs of failure, but essential stages of growth. Jung emphasized that individuation is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming authentic. To be whole is not to eliminate flaws but to recognize them as part of the greater design of the psyche. Wholeness, he said, is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. The individual who undertakes this work becomes more conscious, more self-aware, and more capable of living in harmony with themselves and the world around them. This path is lifelong, a journey, not a destination. With each insight, a person steps closer to their inner center, the self, which Jung described as the unifying principle of the psyche, the silent witness that holds all opposites within it. The closer we move to that center, the more we feel a profound sense of inner freedom, peace, and meaning. Individuation, then, is the art of self-acceptance. It is the courage to look inward, to confront the depths of one's soul, and to bring light into the hidden chambers of the mind. It is the process through which a person stops being merely a reflection of the outer world and begins to live as a true expression of their inner truth. To work with archetypes, Jung taught, is to converse with the ancient symbols that speak through our dreams, art, and imagination. These symbols are not random, they are messages from the collective depths of humanity, guiding us toward understanding. When we learn to interpret them, we begin to see that the myths of old are not about distant gods, but about ourselves. And so, the path of individuation, this delicate work of balancing shadow and light, reason and mystery, becomes not just a psychological process, but a spiritual pilgrimage. It is the journey of the soul returning home to itself. Dreams, the language of the unconscious. After speaking about the process of individuation, it becomes clear that one of its most essential paths leads through our dreams. For Jung, dreams were not mere illusions of the night. They were the sacred bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, the hidden dialogue between the mind we know and the deeper self that moves quietly beneath the surface of awareness. He taught that in dreams, the unconscious reveals its secrets through symbols and images, speaking in a language older than words. These images may seem strange, fragmented, even frightening, yet each one carries meaning. Each dream, Jung believed, is a message from the depths, a living letter written by the psyche itself, offering insight into what the soul is truly feeling and seeking. When we dream of a vast labyrinth, it might reflect the sense of being lost in life's complexities, wandering through the corridors of our own emotions. When water appears calm, dark, or stormy, it may represent our feelings, our inner tides, the unspoken forces shaping our actions. To Jung, these symbols were not random. They were messages encoded in the language of the soul, invitations to explore the hidden architecture of the self. He developed a method of dream interpretation based on association, a process of asking, "What does this symbol mean to me?" rather than seeking fixed, universal definitions. Every dream, he insisted, is personal. Its symbols live within the context of one's own story, yet they also draw from the deep well of archetypes, those timeless images shared by all humanity. By following these associations, a person begins to uncover connections between their inner world and the events of their life. Discovering that the two are never separate, Jung often said that dreams tend to appear when the psyche is under tension, when something inside us seeks balance, growth, or change. Dreams act as natural healers, bringing to the surface what consciousness has ignored. Through their imagery, the unconscious attempts to restore equilibrium, guiding us toward wholeness. He illustrated this with stories from his practice. One patient described dreaming of walking through an old and familiar house. On the upper floors, everything seemed ordinary, but then he found a staircase leading downward into a dimly lit basement filled with ancient, forgotten objects. Fear rose in him, yet he continued deeper. Jung explained that the house represented the man's own psyche. The bright upper room symbolized his conscious life, his routines, his known self, while the basement was the realm of the unconscious, holding repressed emotions, unresolved conflicts, and memories long buried. The descent, though frightening, was a necessary journey toward integration, a confrontation with the parts of oneself that had been denied. In another case, a man dreamed of a giant serpent coiling around his feet. He was terrified but did not flee. He simply stood and watched. Jung saw in this the ancient symbol of the snake, a universal archetype found in countless myths, representing both danger and transformation. He told the man that the dream reflected his inner struggle with change. The fear he felt mirrored his resistance, but his willingness to face the serpent showed readiness for renewal. Through such examples, Jung revealed that dreams are not just reflections of our thoughts, they are active communications from the deeper layers of being. They challenge, comfort, and guide us. By attending to them, we begin to understand ourselves not as fragments, but as evolving wholes. For Jung, analyzing dreams was not a mechanical process but a dialogue, a sacred conversation with the soul. He never reduced dreams to formulas. Instead, he approached them with reverence, curiosity, and humility. The dream, he wrote, is the small hidden door to the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. In this way, dreams became an essential part of the individuation process, the lifelong journey toward unity of the conscious and the unconscious. By entering the world of dreams, we meet our shadow, our fears, our forgotten desires, and also our potential for transformation. Through this encounter, the self begins to heal. To become whole. To listen to our dreams is to listen to the timeless voice within, the same voice that has spoken to humanity since the dawn of time, through myths, visions, and sacred symbols. And when we learn to understand that language, we begin to see that our nightly dreams are not separate from life at all, they are the soul's way of guiding us home. Symbols and their connection to culture. Jung believed that the symbols appearing in our dreams are far from random. They are bridges, living threads that connect our individual psyche to the vast ocean of the collective unconscious, a timeless archive of human experience and inherited meaning. Through these bridges, the soul whispers the language of humanity itself. This is why certain images, water, fire, the sun, the serpent, carry such similar significance across civilizations. They speak to something ancient in us. And yet, each culture, and indeed each person, gives them a unique color. The context of culture shapes how we perceive a symbol. For one people, the snake may be a sacred emblem of wisdom, rebirth, and transformation. For another, it becomes the embodiment of deceit or danger. Each culture retells the same story through its own lens, weaving new meanings into the ancient tapestry. These collective interpretations do not vanish with time, they are carried forward through myths, rituals, and traditions, passed from one generation to the next. But as they pass through us, they merge with our personal experiences, creating subtle variations of meaning. Imagine two people dreaming of the sea. For one, who grew up near the shore, it may symbolize freedom and the call of adventure. For another, who once endured a violent storm, it may represent chaos and fear. Jung taught that every symbol is layered, it belongs both to humanity and to the individual. A dream of an ancient tree, for instance, might universally represent life, growth, and spiritual grounding. But for one dreamer it may also be the echo of childhood memories, the scent of home, or the longing for stability. Thus, symbols live in two dimensions at once, the collective and the personal, forming a sacred dialogue between our inner world and the heritage of all humankind. To interpret a symbol, Jung said, requires not only intellect but intuition. One cannot simply consult a universal dictionary of meanings, for symbols are alive, their essence changes depending on who sees them and when. They are mirrors, reflecting both our culture and our soul. To truly understand them, we must ask, What does this image awaken in me? That is why working with symbols became a central part of Jung's approach to individuation, the process of becoming whole. As we learn to listen to the symbolic language of dreams, art, and myth, we begin to understand the hidden parts of ourselves. We see how our personal stories are woven from the same threads that form the myths of gods and heroes. To study symbols, then, is not merely to analyze the mind, it is to rediscover the secret unity between self and world, between our fleeting lives and the eternal imagination of humanity. Through this awareness, we don't just interpret dreams, we awaken to the deeper wisdom within them, a wisdom that transcends cultures, ages, and names, whispering to us through the language of the soul. Extraversion and introversion, the two directions of the human soul. As Jung's exploration of the human psyche deepened, he began to notice something subtle yet profound, a pattern that shaped the very way people experience the world. He observed that not all minds move in the same direction. Some seem to reach outward, drawn to movement, conversation, and human connection. Others turn inward, seeking stillness, reflection, and meaning within. These were not mere differences of mood or temperament. They were, Jung realized, fundamental orientations of the soul itself. Through years of observing his patients, colleagues, and even himself, Jung came to see that humanity could be understood through two great movements of energy, extraversion and introversion. The extrovert, as Jung described, lives with their attention turned toward the outer world. Their energy flows outward toward people, action, and events. They are energized by social encounters, driven by curiosity for what lies beyond them. The extrovert finds meaning in participation, in dialogue, creation, and expression. Life, to them, is a grand stage, and they feel most alive when they are part of its unfolding drama. The introvert, by contrast, turns inward. Their energy retreats from the noise of the world and seeks nourishment in solitude. Reflection is their element. Silence, their companion. The introvert experiences life from within, filtering events through deep thought and feeling. The outer world may inspire them, but it is within the inner landscape that they find truth, clarity, and peace. Jung was careful to emphasize that these two orientations are not moral categories, not strengths or flaws, not virtues or weaknesses. Rather, they are complementary movements of life energy, both necessary, both sacred. Every person, Jung wrote, is both outwardly and inwardly directed, but one tendency usually dominates. Even the most outgoing extrovert needs moments of solitude, just as the most contemplative introvert yearns for connection. These poles are not prisons. They are rhythms of the psyche, the inhale and exhale of consciousness itself. By naming these two types, Jung offered humanity a gift, a new way to understand difference without judgment. Where once people saw incompatibility, now they could see balance. The world, he showed, thrives on diversity of perception. Each soul, whether drawn to the outer light or the inner flame, completes the other. In this, Jung was not merely describing psychology, he was describing the harmony of existence. The world needs both the voices that speak and the hearts that listen, the explorers who build bridges and the dreamers who build meaning. Together, they form the eternal dialogue of the human spirit, between the self and the world, between the seen and the unseen. The four psychological functions. As Jung's understanding of personality deepened, he realized that human beings do not perceive the world in a single, uniform way. Our experiences, emotions, and choices are filtered through distinct inner mechanisms, what he called psychological functions. These are the core processes through which we interpret reality and make decisions: thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. Each function plays a vital role in shaping our perspective and guiding our actions. They form the inner compass of human consciousness, determining how we relate to the world, to others, and to ourselves. Thinking is the function of logic and rational analysis. It seeks order, structure, and clarity. For those in whom this function dominates, life is a puzzle to be solved. They analyze, categorize, and search for causal relationships. A thinking type makes decisions through reasoning, weighing evidence and facts before acting. For them, truth must be consistent and coherent. Emotion alone is not enough. Thinking helps us organize our experiences into a clear framework, giving structure to the chaos of existence. Feeling, on the other hand, is not the opposite of reason, but its complement. It operates through values and emotional resonance. People who lead with feeling judge situations not by cold logic but by how things align with their inner sense of harmony and meaning. They are guided by empathy, seeking to maintain balance and understanding in relationships. Feeling types often bring warmth, humanity, and compassion to a world that might otherwise seem mechanical. Then there is intuition, a mysterious function that grasps patterns before they are visible. Intuitive people see beyond the surface. They sense potential and future possibilities where others see only facts. For them, life is not just what is, but what could be. They make leaps of insight, guided by a deep inner knowing that often defies explanation. Intuition perceives connections between events that logic alone cannot explain. It is the bridge to the unseen. Finally, there is sensation, the most grounded of the four functions. It focuses on what can be touched, seen, or experienced in the present moment. The sensation type lives through the senses, through color, texture, sound, and taste. They are drawn to the tangible world and value direct experience over speculation. Where intuition dreams of possibilities, sensation anchors us in the here and now. Jung divided these functions into two categories. Thinking and feeling are rational functions. Because they involve judgment, they help us evaluate and decide. Intuition and sensation, on the other hand, are irrational functions. Because they deal with perception, they show us what is, before reason interprets it. Together, they form a balanced psyche, reason and perception, logic and experience, intellect and instinct. No one function defines a person completely. Each of us possesses all four, though one or two usually dominate, shaping how we perceive the world and how the world perceives us. Understanding these functions, Jung said, is a path to self-awareness, a way to see not only our strengths but also the aspects of ourselves we tend to neglect. This insight later inspired the creation of personality topologies. Building on Jung's theories, researchers Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers developed what we now know as the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator (MBTI). It expanded Jung's ideas into 16 distinct personality types based on the interaction of the four functions with two orientations, extraversion and introversion. The MBTI pairs these opposites, thinking or feeling, sensing or intuiting, judging or perceiving, to reveal how each individual experiences life. Today, this model is widely used not only in psychology but also in education, business, and personal development. Yet its roots remain in Jung's vision, the belief that by understanding the architecture of our own mind, we can learn to live more consciously, harmoniously, and authentically. For Jung, the study of these functions was not merely academic, it was a map to the soul. Each function, like a compass point, guides us toward balance and wholeness. To know them is to begin the journey of individuation, the process of becoming fully ourselves. The influence of Jung's ideas across the world of thought and art. Carl Jung's work reached far beyond the walls of psychology. It reshaped how humanity understands the mind, creativity, and the search for meaning. His theories became a bridge between science and spirit, offering new ways to explore not only what we think but why we think it. In psychology, Jung's ideas laid the foundation for analytical psychology. a discipline that departed from Freud's classical psychoanalysis to pursue a deeper exploration of the human psyche. His vision of the collective unconscious, filled with ancient symbols and shared memories, gave therapists a powerful new lens through which to interpret dreams, myths, and symbols. Jung showed that healing was not only a matter of treating symptoms, it was about helping a person rediscover their connection to the universal patterns of life. Modern psychotherapy still draws upon Jung's insights. Depth psychology, archetypal therapy, dream analysis, and shadow work all bear the imprint of his influence. Through these approaches, people learn to recognize the symbols that appear in their inner worlds and use them as keys to personal growth, transformation, and meaning. In philosophy, Jung's work became a spark that reignited the dialogue about consciousness and identity. His notion that every individual follows a unique path towards self-realization, yet remains part of a greater whole, inspired thinkers to look beyond the rational mind. Philosophers such as Martin Heidegger and Michel Foucault later echoed these themes, exploring existence, authenticity, and the mystery of being through a lens reminiscent of Jung's search for individuation. Jung helped reintroduce the sacred dimension into Western philosophy, a recognition that the self is not a static concept but a living process of becoming. In the realm of art and literature, Jung's influence was equally profound. His exploration of archetypes, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the Anima and Animus, offered artists and writers a universal vocabulary of the soul. Painters began to weave archetypal symbols into their work to express the inner journey toward wholeness. Writers such as James Joyce, Hermann Hesse, and Thomas Mann infused their novels with Jungian imagery, using mythic structures to mirror the psychological development of their characters. Hesse's Demian and Steppenwolf, for instance, read like meditations on individuation itself. Cinema, too, found a language through Jung. The haunting imagery of directors such as Friedrich Murnau, Andrei Tarkovsky, and David Lynch reflects Jung's fascination with dreams and the shadow. Their films plunge into the subconscious, revealing the archetypal conflicts that define the human condition: light versus darkness, ego versus soul, chaos versus meaning. Jung's legacy also extends into popular culture. From character design in literature and film to the development of personality models like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, his ideas have shaped how we describe ourselves and relate to one another. The notion of introversion and extraversion, born from Jung's writings, remains a cornerstone of modern personality theory. Ultimately, Jung offered the world more than theories, he gave it a mirror. His concepts of depth psychology, archetypes, and the unconscious continue to shape art, science, and philosophy, reminding us that every creation, every myth, and every story is a reflection of the same timeless patterns that live within us all. His influence endures not merely in textbooks or lectures, but in the imagination of humanity itself, in every film that explores the mystery of dreams, in every novel that traces the hero's journey, and in every person who dares to look inward and ask, "Who am I beneath the mask?" Jung in popular culture. Though Carl Jung lived in the first half of the 20th century, the echoes of his ideas continue to shape the imagination of the modern world. His influence stretches far beyond the boundaries of psychology into art, cinema, literature, and even the stories that define our culture today. Jung didn't just create theories. He gave us a new language for understanding symbols, myths, and the hidden architecture of the human soul. And nowhere is this more visible than in the realm of film and storytelling. In cinema, Jung's archetypes have become the invisible foundation upon which many of the world's most iconic stories are built. Directors such as Francis Ford Coppola, David Lynch, and George Lucas have drawn deeply from his work, weaving his symbols and ideas into the fabric of their creations. Take, for example, Star Wars, George Lucas's timeless epic. Lucas openly admitted that his saga was built on the psychological ideas of Carl Jung and the mythological patterns identified by Joseph Campbell. The characters themselves embody Jungian archetypes. Luke Skywalker as the hero embarking on the journey of individuation. Darth Vader as the shadow, the repressed and destructive side of the self. And Yoda as the wise old man, the archetype of inner wisdom and spiritual guidance. These characters resonate with audiences not because of their lightsabers or battles, but because they reflect universal patterns of transformation and redemption that live within us all. Similarly, filmmaker David Lynch explores the dark and dreamlike aspects of the psyche in his works like Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive. His surreal storytelling and cryptic imagery are steeped in Jungian symbolism. They interplay between the conscious and the unconscious, the dance of shadow and light, the blurred line between dream and reality. Lynch's characters often face their own shadows, revealing how suppressed desires, fears, and traumas surface from the depths of the unconscious to shape the world around them. His films, though strange and unsettling, echo Jung's belief that confronting the darkness within is the only path to self-knowledge. Even outside of cinema, Jung's ideas permeate literature, art, and music. From the mystical imagery in Hermann Hesse's Demian and Steppenwolf, to the symbolic lyrics of musicians who explore the soul's dualities, the fingerprints of Jungian thought are everywhere. The archetypes of the hero, the mother, the trickster, the sage continue to breathe life into every story humanity tells. Jung's vision gave creators a compass to navigate the unconscious, a way to translate the inner landscape of dreams and myths into visible form. His theories became the hidden blueprint behind entire genres: fantasy, psychological drama, even science fiction. And though Jung never wrote a screenplay or directed a film, his spirit lives on in the countless stories that lead us, like his patients once did, towards self-understanding. In the end, Jung's influence on art and culture reminds us of something timeless, that every story, no matter how modern or cosmic, is ultimately about the oldest journey of all, the journey into the depths of the self, toward wholeness and light. Jungian literature. Carl Jung's influence extended far beyond psychology. It shaped art, literature, and the very way we tell stories about the human soul. Writers, poets, and philosophers found in his theories a new language for exploring the mysteries of the mind. Through the lens of Jung's archetypes, literature became not just storytelling, but a mirror of the collective unconscious. In the works of Hermann Hesse, for instance, Jung's ideas find some of their most vivid expression in novels like Steppenwolf, Demian, and The Glass Bead Game. Hesse explored the eternal struggle between light and shadow within the human psyche, the yearning for wholeness that Jung called individuation. His characters are not merely people, they are symbols of inner conflict and transformation. Each journey becomes an allegory of the soul's evolution, a dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious self. Modern authors, too, continue to draw upon Jungian themes. In contemporary fiction and romance, the archetypes of the lover, the hero, and the savior often shape not only the characters' outer actions but also their inner emotional landscapes. These archetypal roles breathe life into their desires, fears, and struggles, turning relationships into metaphors for psychological growth. Jung's influence is especially visible in stories that blur the line between the real and the symbolic. In mythic or psychological fiction, characters frequently encounter their own shadow, seek their anima or animus, or are guided by the wise old man archetype. Echoes of Jung's symbolic map of the soul. Through these inner journeys, literature reveals that the great dramas of mythology are not distant legends, but reflections of what happens within each of us. Even today, countless writers use Jung's concepts to give depth to their characters, constructing narratives that resonate on a subconscious level. When readers recognize fragments of themselves in a fictional hero's doubts, or in a lover's longing, it is because these archetypes still live within us, timeless, universal, and human. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." In this sense, literature inspired by Jung invites us not only to dream, but to awaken, to look within, and find the myths still alive in our own hearts. Jungian music, like dreams, has always been a mirror of the human soul, and it is no surprise that the ideas of Carl Jung have quietly found their way into its harmonies and lyrics. In melodies that speak of self-discovery, inner transformation, or the struggle with one's shadow, we can hear faint echoes of Jung's thought. His archetypes of the hero, the shadow, the anima, the sage have become invisible companions to countless artists seeking to express the universal drama of being human. Jung believed that symbols are the true language of the unconscious, and music, more than any other art, speaks fluently in that language. Every rhythm, every progression of notes, can awaken something ancient within us, the memory of myths, of dreams, of emotions older than reason. That is why songs born from pain, hope, or longing can touch listeners across nations and centuries. They resonate not only with our personal stories but with the collective memory of humanity itself. From classical symphonies that explore the tension between light and darkness to modern songs that capture the battle between self and shadow, Jung's influence hums quietly in the background. Artists who write of rebirth, identity, or the search for meaning are, knowingly or not, walking the path of individuation, the journey toward wholeness that Jung described. In popular culture, his concepts have become part of the creative DNA of entire generations. Filmmakers, lyricists, and composers draw from his archetypes to shape heroes and villains, lovers and seekers, characters who reflect our own hidden truths. Through them, we recognize parts of ourselves that words alone could never describe. Music, in this sense, becomes a bridge, the sacred space where the collective unconscious sings through the voice of the individual. And whether it's a haunting piano piece or a rock ballad about redemption, every note reminds us of the same eternal truth that Jung discovered, that the soul is vast, mysterious, and endlessly striving to return to its source. Criticism of Carl Jung. Despite the profound influence of Carl Jung's ideas on psychology, philosophy, and art, his theories have also faced extensive criticism from the scientific community. Many scholars have argued that while Jung's concepts are intellectually rich and symbolically beautiful, they often lack the empirical rigor required by modern science. One of the main sources of controversy is his concept of the collective unconscious. Jung proposed that beyond our personal memories lies a deeper, universal layer of the psyche, a shared reservoir of archetypal images inherited by all of humanity. For many scientists, however, this idea was too abstract and metaphysical. They questioned how such a concept could ever be verified, measured, or observed within the framework of traditional empirical research. Unlike Freud's psychoanalytic method, which relied on direct observation of patients, Jung's vision extended into the realms of myth, religion, and symbolism, areas that resist quantification and replication. Similarly, Jung's notions of archetypes, the shadow, and individuation have been both celebrated and challenged. Critics argue that these ideas, while powerful as metaphors, are too open-ended to be scientifically tested or clearly defined. Jung's writing often moved fluidly between psychology, mysticism, and mythology, a strength in terms of depth and imagination, but a weakness for those seeking precise, falsifiable theories. Some psychologists have claimed that Jung blurred the line between science and philosophy, relying heavily on intuition, personal reflection, and symbolic interpretation rather than controlled experimentation. His methodology also drew criticism. While Freud attempted to ground psychoanalysis in systematic observation and case studies, Jung embraced a more introspective and interpretive approach. He often used his own dreams, visions, and inner experiences as data, believing that understanding the self was essential to understanding humanity. To his detractors, this made his work too subjective, more akin to art or spiritual inquiry than to scientific research. Yet even his critics could not ignore the enduring impact of his thought. Jung's theories laid the foundation for entire schools of depth psychology and inspired generations of therapists, artists, and thinkers. His influence extended far beyond the walls of clinics and universities, shaping literature, film, and even the modern language of personal growth. Thus, while Jung's work may not fit neatly into the strict definitions of empirical science, it continues to resonate because it speaks to something deeper than measurement and to the mystery of human meaning itself. His critics called him unscientific. His followers called him visionary. Perhaps, as with many great minds, the truth lies somewhere in between. As the flame fades and the night deepens, we close the circle of this journey, the journey through the life and mind of Carl Jung. He was not merely a scientist or philosopher, but a cartographer of the soul, a man who dared to look where few had the courage to gaze into the vast ocean of the unconscious. His path was not easy. It led through doubt, solitude, and the unknown. Yet with every discovery, Jung brought humanity a little closer to understanding itself. He taught that our dreams are not random echoes of the mind, but messages from a deeper world, the world of archetypes, symbols, and eternal patterns. He showed us that within each of us lives the shadow and the light, the hero and the sage, the child and the eternal spirit. Even today, his voice whispers through time. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. These words remain a compass for all who seek meaning in a noisy, restless world. So as you sit by the quiet firelight, remember the same symbols that guided ancient heroes live within you too. The myths are not gone. They've simply moved inward, waiting to be rediscovered. The path of individuation, the journey toward wholeness, is not reserved for sages or mystics. It begins the moment you dare to look within and listen. Let the warmth of the fire remind you of that inner flame, the light that never fades, the one that connects you to all of humanity. And as the last sparks rise into the night, know that Jung's legacy endures, not only in books or theories, but in every soul that chooses to awaken.